One Rainy Night by Richard Laymon, a prime example of the splatterpunk subgenre for which the author was renowned. So, this is the third book by Richard Laymon that I have read, and it almost ended up being the best one yet. Although, really, I suppose that perhaps says very little, given that quality literature is not a descriptor which could probably be applied to Richard Laymon's body of work, because Richard Laymon's body of work was notoriously not what you would call highbrow or literary. Like, Stephen King once likened his own output to the literary equivalent of a Big Mac and fries. If Stephen King is the literary equivalent of a Big Mac and fries, then Richard Laymon is probably the literary equivalent of one of those sandwiches that you can get out of a vending machine. You don't know how long it's been in the vending machine. You don't want to think about how long it's been in the vending machine. And you probably also don't want to think about how it can last for any period of time within the vending machine. You just, you don't think about it. You just put your money in the slot and, snarf that thing down with minimal consideration, right? That is the best way that I could probably describe Richard Laymon's bibliography. But that is not at all to say that his books are necessarily without their own charms, their own grisly and incredibly perverted charms. But I will talk about that, I suppose. So, what is the story of One Rainy Night? Well, it takes place in a California town called Bixby, where a black youth has been brutally murdered. The town, I should probably say, is like overwhelmingly white, and this black kid has just been brutally murdered in an obviously racially motivated hate crime. And shortly after that, a mysterious black rain begins to fall on the town, and anyone who is caught in the rain turns into an absolute maniac, hell bent on rape, murder, and just all around carnage. And this, needless to say, leads to widespread chaos. So that's, the broad strokes of the plot. I'm not going to really go into too much depth or detail as regards the specifics, because One Rainy Night has kind of a considerable cast of characters, including a cop, a babysitter, a pizza delivery woman, as well as some very heinous kids. And it kind of just cycles through these various story threads over the course of its page count. But so I'm not really going to go into like the nitty gritty and break down everything that happens. All you need to know, I suppose, is that hate crime was committed, mysterious and sinister black rain begins to fall on the town and turns people into maniacs. That's pretty much the book. So let's talk about the technical qualities of the book. And then we'll talk about my kind of reaction to the book. So the writing in this book is not what you'd call particularly strong. And that's just par for the course with Richard Laymon, because Richard Laymon was noted for having the most like basic bitch, bare bones prose that you may ever encounter. And that's not to say that he like misuses words or like writes in a necessarily like poor manner, but he was definitely not the greatest wordsmith. The writing is just pretty. It's just pretty meat and potatoes. The one thing that you'll notice when reading a Richard Laymon book is that there is precious little metaphor or simile, or even any kind of like lofty, like flowery descriptions, and there's none of that. It's just to the point, dirt simple writing, very simplistic, short declarative sentences. That's pretty much all there is to it. I think it was Chekhov who said, when it comes to writing, don't tell me that the moon is out. Show me its light glimmering on broken glass, or something like that. Richard Laymon was definitely the type of writer who would just say the moon is out, because that's kind of the impression that you get when reading his books. It's just no frills at all. Just the most basic bitch writing. And again, that's not to say that he necessarily is like constructing sentences incorrectly or anything that you could really impeach when it comes to the writing, but it's not writing that's going to garner any or much acclaim. It's just, again, just meat and potatoes, just the simplest writing that you may ever encounter. It's on like a kind of a high school level. So yeah, the writing ain't getting many points for me as regards the prose. Now on to the characters, because as flat as the writing is, the characters are likewise pretty flat. But again, that's just par for the course with a Richard Laymon book, because you don't read a Richard Laymon book for intensive psychological exploration. No, you just read Richard Laymon books for the carnage and the hysteria. Like, Laymon knew his strengths, and he really played to them, because he really doesn't bother with any kind of like character depth in this. There's not much to speak of here. The characters all feel kind of the same, especially the male characters, because if you are familiar with the late great Richard Laymon, you'll know that every male character in his books are just perverts, just total perverts, with an absolute like adolescent fixation on breasts and nipples. And you got characters in here just popping a bone at the most inappropriate of times. Literally, you've got people just getting hacked to bits by crazy people, dismembered, just killed in the most violent ways. But then as soon as some lady's top comes off, you just got immediate erections, and like all of the rest of the carnage is just tuned out. It's just nothing but breasts, right? That's about what you can expect from the male characters in any Richard Laymon book. There's just not much here in terms of like psychological depth, but like he knew that, like this was never intended to be some kind of character study. It's just intended to be a high octane thrill ride with ample carnage and also sexual perversion. So characters also suck. But now let's talk about the actual story and why this book did have some real merit to it, up to a point anyway. So the thing about Richard Laymon's books is that they're fast paced. Like, he was writing like the kind of just lowest form of like trash lit popcorn reading that you're liable to encounter, but he knew that, and he was actually pretty good at that. And One Rainy Night actually exemplifies that pretty well, because this story like cooks. The thing about Richard Laymon's books is that there's virtually never any backstory or setup. The action usually starts within a couple of pages, and then it never lets up until the end. And such is the case with One Rainy Night. It takes about a page and a half to 2 pages for the action to begin, for the black rain to start falling, and then it literally is just pedal to the floor for the entirety of the book. Literally does not let up till the end. And there is something to be said for that, because this book will keep you turning the pages. Like, this is a true page turner, albeit of the most lurid and kind of sleazy type. But, credit where it's due, it does know how to keep your attention. But let's talk about why this book, almost, in spite of all of its myriad flaws and shortcomings, why it almost ended up being the best of the Richard Laymon books that I've read thus far, but why it ultimately fell short. So, Richard Laymon's books are also not really noted for the most rigorous logic when it comes to the decisions that his characters make. I've even read somewhere in a review of one of his books that somebody said, like, it seemed like when it came to his characters that, like, it was always the least logical course of action. That was what the characters would take. It's kind of the literary equivalent of a B movie. Actually, scratch that. It's not even the literary equivalent of a B movie. It's more along the lines of the literary equivalent of like an Ed Wood Plan 9 from outer space type movie. It's very schlocky, but it's intentionally so. It's kind of like, elbowing you in the ribs like the whole time. Uh, kind of it's in on the joke sort of. But nonetheless, One Rainy Night actually did hold together in terms of like internal logic and like plot cohesion up until we get towards the ending, and then he just kind of throws out all rationality, and it kind of just broke the story. So throughout the book, people who are caught out in the black rain turn into just crazy people, just absolute lunatics. But people who do not get direct first-hand contact to the black rain do not, they it doesn't apply to them. That is to say, if one of the crazy people are like wrestling around with another, like a dry person, and they're fighting, and then they get some of the black stuff on them, it doesn't have any effect. And at one point in the book, one of the characters even remarks upon that, because the other one of the characters is like, if you get it on you off of the people who are like who have been directly exposed to the rain, it won't affect you, so you don't have to worry about it. And then one of the characters remarks, that doesn't even make any sense. And then someone says, who cares? It's something like that. It's like, it's in on the joke, right? But still, it is very firmly established in the book that if you are caught out like directly in the rain, that you're going to turn into a maniac and you will have no control over your like homicidal urges. Um, but then towards the end, as we get up to the denouement of the book, he just throws that out the window. Like, we get characters, some of the main characters who get directly rained on, they turn black, and then they just like can control it. They're just like, no, I will overcome it. Like, it makes no sense whatsoever. It just completely breaks its own rules, and it's just so flagrant. And it didn't even have to be that way. Like, Laymon, there were so many ways that he could have avoided that, but like he just went to the most like game breaking plot development that he could possibly have done, and it just completely broke the entire story. Again, it threw out all sense of internal logic, and it just completely just like, again, it just broke the story. So ultimately, it did not come out the best of the Laymon books that I've read so far, but it was still entertaining, and it is so intrinsically Laymon. Like, this is just, again, just a prime example of Laymon's output. It is just incredibly sleazy. And just, I mean, one thing about Richard Laymon is that there's truly just no limits when it comes to his writing. Like, there's nothing that he would not do. He is one of the, I guess he is the only writer that you'll probably ever encounter that will describe like young children, like 9-year-old children, getting like graphically raped and brutalized, and then just in just the most lurid detail, and then it's played off for titillation. Again, there's just no limits, and again, it applies with One Rainy Night. You have one of the characters in here, the pizza delivery woman, who gets just brutally raped by some very malicious teenagers, or teenager at least. And the thing about Laymon is that it can catch you off guard. And it had been so long since I had read the last Richard Laymon book that I read. Again, it's been years, that it had kind of faded from my mind just how like far he will go, like how he really has no limits. Because usually when you have a main female character in these kind of stories, like, they may get sexually menaced, but usually it stops short of having them actually be like violated, because that's just kind of a no-go usually when it comes to these kind of books. But not with Richard Laymon. No, like, women in his books are just meat. Like, they're just a collection of holes to be used and then violently destroyed most of the time. And is degrading and as sleazy as that sounds, as degrading and as sleazy as that actually is, it's just again kind of one of the perverse charms of Richard Laymon, that he had no limits. And like again, one of the main characters in this just gets brutally raped, and again it's just described in the most graphic detail imaginable again, and it's played again for titillation. It's just rape porn basically. But again, it did surprise me because it had been so long since I'd read a Richard Laymon book that it kind of faded from my mind just how far he would go. And I was reminded real quick when reading One Rainy Night, and he also surprised me in more ways than that, because towards the end of the book he actually kills off a couple of characters who up to that point have been main characters in the story and who I really did not expect to be killed. That actually surprised me, even knowing Richard Laymon. That actually surprised me that he killed off a couple of characters in this that I had thought would be off limits. But again, that just goes to show that Laymon had no limits. There's really nothing that he would not do in his books. But I will say this for One Rainy Night. I said that Richard Laymon was never noted for being a particularly highbrow author, but One Rainy Night maybe is as close as he ever came to being like highbrow, because there is an obvious kind of racial subtext to this book where a black kid gets brutally killed in the beginning, and then the black rain falls on the town, the predominantly white town, and then turns everybody else black and turns everybody into killers. And so obviously there's kind of a racial thing going on there. Again, it's not anything that's like harped upon. It's not anything that he actually like explores in depth, but it's there in the background. You can tell that this is kind of, I would never call this a book with a moral or a message. I would never say that of probably any Richard Laymon book, but there is something going on here, however lightly. But yeah, that's One Rainy Night for you. So how would I rate One Rainy Night? Well, perhaps I'm being a bit generous with it, but I think I'm going to give One Rainy Night a C minus, like just barely breaking over into C territory. And that's probably that may be the highest that I could probably ever rate any Richard Laymon book. It's like a C minus. But knowing all of Laymon's faults and shortcomings as a writer, the absolute high school level writing, the characters who are just flat as a flitter, and of course just the onslaught of perversity and depravity. But for all that, I also did observe Laymon's strengths in this book. Just the high octane, never let up storytelling, pretty well paced actually. But what really broke this book again is just how he broke his own rules in the story. Like, he just threw out all internal consistency, internal logic, and it really just kind of let me down there towards the end. Because up until that point, I'm not saying that this was anything that I was going to ever rate like an A, but I was quite pleased with the book up until the ending, when he just completely just threw out every all logic and consistency. That broke it. But still, for all its faults, of which there are many, I think One Rainy Night is still one of the stronger. I mean, I've only read 3 Laymon books as of now, but I would still say it's probably maybe the second best. It's still fun. Like, at the end of the day, it's fun, and that's really all it's meant to be, is fun, in a very grimy, kind of shameful way, but it is fun. And I'll give it credit for that. It did succeed in its mission, I guess. So, like I say, perhaps I'm being generous, but I'm going to give One Rainy Night a C minus, just like the lowest C that I could possibly give it. It's not great. It's barely even. In fact, I don't even really know if I would call this book "quote unquote" good, but it is fun. It's good schlocky fun, and if you have the tastes for what Richard Laymon does or did, this will definitely suit you. So Yeah, it is what it is. So, One Rainy Night by Richard Laymon. Have you read the book? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything that I've said here today. And if you haven't read One Rainy Night, like I say, this is up to a point one of the stronger of the Laymon books that I've read. So, could recommend it if you want to dip into the waters, the very dirty and soiled waters of Richard Laymon. If you want to take that plunge, you might want to read this because it is definitely representative of Richard Laymon's body of work. So take that how you will. But as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.